No food for the fat one. They starved the obese girl for days until the mountain man fed her. The winter of 1872 came early to the Colorado Territory, and with it came a cold that seeped not just into bones, but into hearts. Clara Mae Henson stood in the corner of the drafty boarding house kitchen, her stomach growling so loudly she was certain the entire household could hear it. 3 days. It had been 3 days since she'd been allowed more than scraps and water. Her cousin's wife, Parthenia, stood at the stove frying bacon and eggs, the smell making Clara's mouth water and her vision blur with hunger. "Don't even think about it," Parthenia said without turning around, her voice sharp as winter wind. "That food's for people who earn their keep, not for lazy, gluttonous creatures who do nothing but eat us out of house and home." Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the broom she'd been using to sweep the floor. She'd been awake since before dawn, hauling water from the well, scrubbing floors, washing linens in water so cold it made her fingers turn purple. But none of it mattered. Nothing she did would ever be enough. "I've done all the washing, ma'am," Clara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And the floors, and you'll do it again tomorrow and the day after," Parthenia interrupted, finally turning to face her. The woman's thin face was pinched with disgust as she looked Clara up and down. "Look at you! How you got so big when we barely feed you is beyond comprehension. Must be sneaking food like the thief you are." Clara wasn't sneaking food. She hadn't eaten anything substantial in so long that her hands shook constantly, and the room sometimes spun when she stood too quickly. But she'd learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. Her cousin Marcus came down the stairs then, buttoning his vest. He was Parthenia's husband, and Clara's only living relative after her parents had died in a prairie fire 2 years prior. He'd taken her in with what seemed like Christian charity, but that charity had curdled into resentment within weeks. "Is she still here?" Marcus asked, not looking at Clara. "I told you to have her working before dawn." "She has been working," Parthenia said, "but she moves slow as molasses. All that weight, you know." Marcus grabbed a plate of breakfast and sat at the table. Clara watched as he cut into the eggs, yellow yolk running across the plate, mixing with the bacon grease. Her stomach cramped painfully. "Please," she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Could I have just a little—" "No!" Parthenia's shout made Clara flinch. The woman crossed the kitchen in 3 quick strides and grabbed Clara's arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "No food for the fat one, you hear me? Not until you've earned it. And at the rate you work, that'll be never." Clara felt tears burn her eyes but refused to let them fall. She'd cried too many times before, and it had never helped. Crying just made them angrier, made them call her a child, a burden, a creature too emotional and too large for this world. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work and hunger. Clara hauled more water, scrubbed the boarding house steps, beat rugs until dust clouded the air and made her cough. By evening, she was so weak she could barely stand. When she asked for supper, Parthenia threw a hard crust of stale bread at her feet. "That's all you're getting," she said, "and you should be grateful for it." Clara picked up the bread with shaking hands and retreated to the tiny storage room under the stairs, where she slept on a thin pile of rags. The bread was so hard she had to soak it in water from her washing pitcher to make it soft enough to chew. It did nothing to ease the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. That night, As she lay on her makeshift bed, Clara heard Marcus and Parthenia arguing in the room above. "We can't keep feeding her," Marcus said. "Even the little we give her is too much. She's eating us into poverty." "So what do you suggest?" Parthenia's voice was cold and calculating. "I don't know. Maybe she should go somewhere else, somewhere she can work for her food, or just go." Clara pulled the thin blanket over her head, but it couldn't block out their words. She had nowhere to go, no family, no friends, no money. She was trapped in this house of cruelty, starving slowly, dying by degrees. The blizzard came 3 days later, sweeping down from the San Juan Range with a fury that rattled windows and piled snow against doors. The temperature plummeted, and the wind howled like a living thing. Clara had been given even less food over those 3 days, sometimes nothing at all. She was so weak now that climbing the stairs to empty chamber pots left her breathless and dizzy. Her body was consuming itself, and she could feel herself fading, becoming less substantial with each passing hour. On the 4th day of the storm, Parthenia came to Clara's storage room with a bundle. "Get up," she said. "You're leaving." Clara struggled to sit up, her vision swimming. "Leaving? But where?" "I don't care where," Parthenia said flatly. "Away from here. You've been nothing but a burden since you arrived. We took you in out of Christian duty, but there's only so much charity a body can be expected to give, especially to someone like you." "But the storm will cover you going. No one will know we turned you out, and frankly, no one will care. Now get up before I drag you out myself." Clara tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Parthenia made a sound of disgust and called for Marcus. Together, they hauled Clara to her feet and pushed her toward the door. They thrust the bundle, which contained nothing but Clara's threadbare shawl and a single pair of worn gloves, into her arms. "Please," Clara begged, tears streaming down her face now. "I'll work harder. I'll eat less. Please don't." But the door was already opening, and the storm rushed in like a wild animal. Marcus and Parthenia pushed her out onto the porch, and Clara fell to her knees in the snow. The door slammed behind her, and she heard the bolt slide home with terrible finality. The cold was instantaneous and absolute. The wind tore at Clara's thin dress and cut through to her skin like knives. Snow swirled around her so thickly she couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. She tried to stand, but fell again, her starved body refusing to cooperate. She crawled off the porch, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she had to move or freeze to death. The town of Dusty Hollow was small, but in the blizzard every building looked the same, and Clara quickly lost her bearings. She stumbled through drifts that came up to her knees, fell against buildings, scraped her hands raw trying to find a door that would open. But every door she tried was locked. Every window shuddered against the storm. And even if she'd found an open door, she knew what would happen. They'd take one look at her and turn her away, just as Marcus and Parthenia had done. She was unlovable, unwanted, too large and too burdensome for anyone to care about. Clara didn't know how long she wandered. Time lost all meaning in the white chaos of the storm. Her feet went numb first, then her hands. Her face burned with cold, then stopped feeling anything at all. The hunger that had plagued her for days faded away, replaced by a strange, floating sensation. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings ended and the wilderness began. The forest loomed ahead, dark pines barely visible through the driving snow. Clara knew she should go back, should try to find shelter, but her body kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other, like a wagon rolling downhill. The trees swallowed her. The wind was slightly less here, blocked by the dense forest, but the cold was even deeper. Clara's legs finally gave out completely, and she collapsed in the snow beneath a massive pine tree. She couldn't feel her body anymore. She couldn't feel anything. As her eyes drifted closed, Clara thought about her life. 22 years of rejection and cruelty, of being told she was too much and never enough, of going to bed hungry and waking up to mockery. She thought about how she'd never been loved, never been held tenderly, never been looked at with anything but disgust or pity. Maybe this was mercy, she thought. Maybe freezing to death in the forest was God's way of ending her suffering. The darkness came for her then, and Clara May Henson surrendered to it, expecting never to wake again. Clara woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation after the killing cold that at first she thought she was dead, and this was heaven. But slowly, other sensations returned. The crackle of a fire, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking, the softness of furs beneath her body. She opened her eyes. She was in a cabin, small but well built, with a stone fireplace where flames danced cheerfully. The walls were decorated with animal pelts and drying herbs hanging from the rafters. A pot hung over the fire, and the smell coming from it made Clara's stomach clench painfully. "You're awake." The voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Clara turned her head. It took effort. Her body felt heavy as lead, and saw a man sitting by the fire. He was enormous, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard shot through with silver and gray. His hair, long and tied back, was the same salt and pepper color. He wore buckskin clothes and heavy boots, and his hands, currently stirring the pot, were scarred and weathered. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They were gray as storm clouds, and they held a depth of sorrow that made her breath catch. "Where?" Clara's voice came out as a croak. "My cabin," the man said. "Found you in the snow 2 days ago. Thought you were dead at first, but you had a faint heartbeat. Brought you here." He ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl. "You need to eat. Slowly, though. Your body's been starved too long." He brought the bowl to her, and Clara saw it was rabbit stew, thick with meat and vegetables. The smell made her dizzy with want. "Can you sit up?" he asked. Clara tried, but her arms wouldn't support her weight. Without a word, the man, gentle despite his size, helped her into a sitting position, propping her against a pile of furs. Then he sat beside her and lifted a spoonful of stew to her lips. "Go on," he said quietly. "It's safe." Clara opened her mouth and let him feed her. The stew was hot and savory, and it was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she chewed and swallowed. "Slowly," the man reminded her, his voice impossibly gentle. "Your stomach's not used to food. Too much too fast and you'll be sick." He fed her spoonful by spoonful, patient and careful, until the bowl was empty. Clara was crying openly now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "Don't cry," the man said, though his own eyes looked suspiciously bright. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here." "Why?" Clara choked out. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I'm nothing." The man set the bowl aside and looked at her for a long moment. "Because leaving someone to die in the snow isn't right," he said finally, "and because no one is nothing. My name's Elias Boone. Clara May Henson," she whispered. "Well, Clara May Henson, you're going to stay here until you're strong again. And while you're here, you'll be fed and warm. That's not negotiable." More tears came, but these were different. Not tears of despair, but of overwhelming relief, and something she couldn't quite name. For the first time in as long as she could remember, someone was being kind to her, not out of duty or pity, but because he chose to. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." "Just Elias," he said, "and you don't need to thank me for doing what's right." The days that followed were the strangest and most peaceful of Clara's life. Elias fed her 3 times a day. Simple food, but always enough. Rabbit stew, venison, fish caught from the half-frozen stream nearby, cornbread baked in the fire. He was careful not to give her too much at once, knowing her body needed time to adjust, but he made sure she never went hungry. As her strength slowly returned, Clara began to help around the cabin. At first, Elias protested, saying she needed to rest, but she insisted. She couldn't bear to be a burden again, couldn't stand the thought of him resenting her the way Marcus and Parthenia had. But Elias was different. When she hauled water from the stream, he didn't complain that she was slow. When she mended his shirts with clumsy stitches, her hand still weak, he thanked her sincerely. When she burned the cornbread one morning, he just laughed and said they'd feed it to the birds. He taught her things too, how to build a fire that would last through the night, how to read the sky for coming storms, how to set snares for rabbits and dress the meat afterward. He was patient and kind, never raising his voice, never making her feel stupid when she made mistakes. At night, they sat by the fire, and slowly Clara learned about Elias Boone. He'd been a soldier in the Civil War, fighting for the Union. He'd survived battles whose names Clara had heard whispered in town, Shiloh, Gettysburg, Chickamauga, and carried scars both visible and hidden. After the war, he'd married a woman named Sarah, and they'd had a daughter, Grace. "She was 7, Elias said one night, staring into the fire. "Same age as you probably were when you started realizing the world was cruel." His voice was thick with old pain. "House fire. I was out hunting. Came back to find everything gone." Clara reached out without thinking and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. "That was 12 years ago," Elias continued. "Couldn't stay in that town anymore. Too many ghosts. So I came here, to the mountains. Thought if I stayed away from people, maybe the guilt would fade too." "It wasn't your fault," Clara said softly. "Head knows that. Heart's a different matter." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "But maybe there's a reason you stumbled into my territory that night. Maybe God doesn't give up on us, even when we've given up on ourselves." Clara felt something shift in her chest, something warm and frightening and wonderful all at once. She'd never felt anything like it before. She didn't have a name for it yet, but it made her heart beat faster whenever Elias smiled at her. Winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves, and the first green shoots appeared in the snow. Clara had been with Elias for nearly 2 months, and she was unrecognizable from the half-frozen girl he'd carried out of the snow. Her strength had returned, her cheeks had color, and her eyes held a light that had never been there before. She moved around the cabin with confidence now, comfortable in this place that had become home. And somewhere along the way, comfort had turned into something deeper. She caught herself watching Elias as he worked. The way his hands moved with such sureness, the way his face softened when he looked at her, the rare smile that transformed his stern features into something beautiful. She thought about him constantly, dreamed of him at night, and felt her heart race whenever he was near. Clara had never experienced romantic love before. She'd never even imagined it was possible for someone like her. But here, in this cabin far from the cruelty of civilization, she'd found something she'd thought existed only in storybooks. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Clara worked up the courage to speak. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "can I tell you something?" He looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Of course." Clara took a deep breath. I know I'm not beautiful. I know men don't look at women like me and feel anything good. But being here with you, being treated like I matter, like I'm—" She struggled for words. "Like I'm human. It's made me feel things I never thought I'd feel." Elias set down the knife, his expression unreadable. "I'm falling in love with you," Clara said, the words rushing out now. "I know I shouldn't. I know you probably see me as a burden or a charity case or—" "Stop!" Elias's voice was rough. He stood abruptly, turning away from her. "You don't know what you're saying." Clara felt her heart crack. "I do know. I'm not a child, Elias. I'm 22 years old, and I know my own heart." "Your heart is mistaken," Elias said, still not looking at her. "You're grateful. That's all this is. Gratitude confused with affection. It's not—" "I'm an old man, Clara." Elias turned to face her then, and she saw pain etched deep in his features. "I'm 53 years old. I've got more years behind me than ahead. I'm broken in ways you can't understand. The war, Sarah, Grace, I lost everything once, and I can't." His voice broke. "I can't survive losing someone again, and I sure as hell don't deserve someone like you looking at me like I'm worth loving." "But you are," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "You're the only person who's ever been kind to me, the only one who's ever made me feel like I was worth something. How can that not mean anything?" Elias closed his eyes. "It means everything," he whispered, "and that's why I can't. Do you understand? If I let myself love you, and then something happens, if I lose you like I lost them, it'll destroy me. I can't go through that again." "So you'd rather push me away?" Clara stood on shaking legs. "You'd rather we both be lonely than take a chance on happiness?" "Yes," Elias said flatly, "because loneliness is survivable. Loss isn't." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Clara felt something inside her break, not just her heart, but something deeper, something fundamental. She'd finally found someone she could love, someone who made her feel whole, and he was rejecting her, not because of her body, not because she was too much or not enough, but because he was too afraid to try. That night, Clara lay awake on her pile of furs, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Elias breathing in his corner of the cabin, equally sleepless. She'd been foolish. She'd let herself hope, let herself believe that maybe she could have something beautiful in her life. But hope was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. As dawn broke, Clara made a decision. She couldn't stay here anymore. The pain of being so close to Elias while knowing he'd never allow himself to love her was unbearable. She had to leave, had to prove to herself, and maybe to him, that she was strong enough to survive on her own. She waited until Elias went outside to check his trap lines. Then she dressed in the warmest clothes she had, packed what little food she could carry, and slipped out the back of the cabin. The mountains were still dangerous in early spring. Snow remained in the shadows, and ice lurked beneath innocent-looking puddles. But Clara didn't care. She just walked, following the stream downward, hoping it would eventually lead to a town or settlement. Hours passed. Her feet ached, and her breath came in gasps. But she kept going, driven by hurt and determination in equal measure. She didn't hear Elias calling her name behind her, his voice growing hoarse with desperation. By the time Clara realized she'd made a terrible mistake, it was too late. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in with frightening speed. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. Clara tried to retrace her steps, but everything looked the same. Trees and rocks and snow, endless and indifferent. She was lost. Panic set in. Clara stumbled forward, no longer sure which direction she was going, only knowing she had to find shelter. But there was nothing. No caves, no overhangs, just the endless forest and the growing storm. When the snow began to fall, Clara knew she was in serious trouble. She pushed through drifts, fell over hidden logs, scraped her hands raw on rocks. Her body, still not fully recovered from months of starvation, began to fail her again. She collapsed beside a partially frozen stream, too exhausted to go any farther. The snow fell heavier now, covering her like a blanket. Clara thought about dying here, alone and unloved, just as she'd almost died before Elias found her. Maybe this was her fate. Maybe she'd never been meant to survive. "Clara!" The voice was distant, barely audible over the wind, but Clara recognized it immediately. "Clara!" Closer now. Clara tried to respond but couldn't make her voice work. She tried to move, but her body refused. Then he was there, Elias, covered in snow, his face wild with fear. He dropped to his knees beside her and gathered her into his arms. "You stubborn, foolish woman," he said, his voice breaking. "What were you thinking? You could have died out here." "Better than," Clara managed to whisper, "better than watching you. Hold yourself back from living." Elias made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You're dying of exposure, and you're lecturing me?" He pulled her closer, sharing his warmth. "Listen to me, Clara May Henson. I was wrong. I was a coward and a fool, and I was wrong." Clara's eyes fluttered open. "I've been dead for 12 years, Elias continued, his words tumbling out urgently. "Just existing, not living. And then you came into my life, and suddenly I could see color again, feel warmth again. I was terrified because I thought if I lost you, it would kill me. But the truth is, pushing you away is killing me just as surely." He cupped her face in his rough hands. "I love you," he said. "I love your gentleness and your strength. I love the way you hum while you cook and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love you not despite your body, but as part of the whole beautiful person you are, and if you'll have me, if you'll forgive a scared old man for being stupid, I promise I'll never push you away again." Clara felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "You love me?" "With everything I have left to give," Elias said, "which might not be much, but it's yours if you want it." "I want it," Clara whispered. "I want you." Elias kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, gentle kisses that tasted of snow and salt and promise. "Then let's get you home," he said, "because we've got a life to start living together." Clara recovered slowly, but this time with Elias's love surrounding her like sunshine. He was different now, softer, more open, more willing to touch and be touched. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her more stories about Sarah and Grace, and Clara listened, understanding that his past love didn't diminish what he felt for her. She told him about her parents, about her lonely childhood, about Marcus and Parthenia's cruelty. "I should ride down to Dusty Hollow and give them a piece of my mind," Elias growled one night. "No," Clara said, tucking herself closer to him. "They don't matter any more. They're part of a life I'm leaving behind. This is my life now." As the snow melted and spring truly arrived, the mountains transformed into something magical. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Deer appeared with spotted fawns. The stream ran full and clear, full of fish that Elias taught Clara to catch. They worked side by side, repairing the cabin's roof, planting a garden, building a fence for the goat Elias had acquired from a passing trader. At night, they lay together in front of the fire, and Elias would run his fingers through Clara's hair and tell her she was beautiful until she almost believed it. "You are, you know," he said one evening. "Beautiful, I mean, the way the firelight catches your eyes, the way you smile when you're proud of something you've made, the way you look at the mountains like they're a gift. That's real beauty, Clara, not the shallow kind that fades, but the kind that grows deeper with time." Clara kissed him. "You're a poet, Elias Boone." "Only with you," he said. One warm afternoon in May, as they sat outside the cabin watching clouds drift across the sky, Elias took Clara's hand. "Marry me," he said. Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me," Elias repeated. "I know we can't get to a preacher easily, and I know some folks would say I'm too old for you, or you're too—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "Too anything. But I don't care what people think. I want you to be my wife. I want to spend whatever years I have left making you happy." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married a week later, in a meadow full of columbines, with a traveling circuit preacher Elias had tracked down. The ceremony was simple. Just Clara in a white dress she'd sewn herself, Elias in his best buckskin, and the mountains as witnesses. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed Clara like she was the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. Years passed, hard years sometimes, but good ones. Clara learned to shoot and hunt alongside Elias. She became known to the few trappers and traders who passed through the mountains as Boone's woman, tough, capable, and fiercely loved. She filled the cabin with warmth and laughter, and slowly Elias's smiles came easier and his nightmares grew fewer. In the spring of 1875, Clara gave birth to a son. They named him Jonah. "Jonah," Elias explained, holding his newborn son with trembling hands, "because, like the prophet, we were both swallowed by darkness and then spit back out into the light." Jonah grew up wild and free in the mountains, learning his father's skills and his mother's gentleness. When he was 10, they moved down from the high peaks to the growing town of Silverton, where Clara convinced Elias that Jonah needed education. Clara, with her patient nature and love of learning, became the town's first school teacher. People who'd known her in Dusty Hollow, including some who'd turned her away from their doors that terrible night, were shocked to see her transformed, not in body, but in spirit. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, beloved by her students and respected by their parents. Elias built the schoolhouse with his own hands, and on the day it opened, he sat in the back row and watched his wife teach with pride blazing in his eyes. Parthenia and Marcus came through Silverton once, years later, fallen on hard times and looking for work. They saw Clara, happy, loved, surrounded by children who adored her, and recognition dawned slowly on their faces. Clara met Parthenia's eyes across the street. For a moment, the old fear flickered. Then Elias's hand found hers, and Jonah appeared at her other side, and Clara felt the love surrounding her like armor. She smiled at Parthenia, not a cruel smile, but one of pity, and turned away. They no longer had any power over her. They never would again. That evening, as the sun set over the San Juan Range, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Clara stood on the porch of their house, with Elias's arms around her waist and Jonah playing in the yard. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me?" Elias kissed the top of her head. "Not for 1 second. You saved me, Clara, more than I saved you that night in the snow." "We saved each other," Clara said, leaning back against his chest. And as the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, like promises being kept, Clara thought about that girl who'd been thrown into the snow to die, that girl who'd believed she was unlovable, unworthy, too much of everything wrong and not enough of anything right. She'd been wrong, so desperately, completely wrong, because here, in this life she'd built with her mountain man, surrounded by love and purpose and belonging, Clara May Boone had finally found what she'd always needed. Not to be smaller or quieter or less, just to be seen, to be loved, to be enough exactly as she was. And in the end, that made all the difference.